2Pac. 2Pac's very first tattoo sits on the left side of his chest. It simply reads 2Pac, but for him, it carried the weight of identity, destiny, and defiance. He got it at just 18 years old in 1989, a time when he was still figuring out who he was and where he fit in the world. This was him signing his name into history before the world even knew who he was. 2Pac was born in Lausanne Parish Crooks, but his mother, Afeni Shakur, changed his name when he was a baby. She named him 2Pac Amaru Shakur after 2Pac Amaru II, the last Incan ruler of Peru, who led an uprising against Spanish colonizers in the 1700s. The name itself means shining serpent in Quechua, a symbol of wisdom and rebellion. So when 2Pac tattooed 2Pac across his chest, it wasn't just a nickname or a stage name, it was a modern translation of that ancient resistance. Back then, 2Pac was still straddling two worlds. On one hand, he was the kid who studied Shakespeare and ballet at the Baltimore School for the Arts. On the other, he was hustling to get into the music industry, starting out as a roadie and backup dancer for Digital Underground. That tattoo became the dividing line between those two lives, the disciplined student and the young rebel on the rise. Nefertiti to die for. On the right side of his chest, balancing the 2Pac tattoo, 2Pac inked the head of Queen Nefertiti, one of ancient Egypt's most iconic figures, with the words "to die for" written beneath. The placement, opposite his own name, wasn't accidental. It represented the two forces that defined him: self and legacy, man and mother, warrior and nurturer. This tattoo was 2Pac's tribute to his mother, Afeni Shakur. Nefertiti symbolized everything Afeni embodied: strength, beauty, intelligence, and power. She had been a Black Panther, a woman who organized community programs, fought for justice, and stood her ground against the system that wanted her destroyed. She even defended herself in court during the famous Panther 21 trial and won. To 2Pac, Afeni wasn't just his mother, she was his first hero, his living queen.
My mom's is a bomb. World's best mom.
The phrase "to die for" came from one of his own mantras, something he'd later echo in his lyrics. If you can't find something to live for, then you best find something to die for. For him, that was how he lived. Everything he believed in, from speaking out against racism and poverty to fighting for the voiceless, came from the moral compass his mother gave him.
I would have went the same way my mother went had not she did her route and showed me where it went wrong with her.
The Nefertiti tattoo wasn't just about admiration. It was a spiritual bond carved into his skin. It represented the lessons Afeni drilled into him, that love and struggle go hand in hand, and that to be truly alive, you had to stand up for something greater than yourself. When 2Pac recorded Dear Mama years later, recovering from gunshot wounds and emotional trauma, that tattoo was like a visual echo of the song's message. 50 Ninjas. Just below his chest, sitting right above his iconic Thug Life tattoo, one of 2Pac's most powerful and misunderstood pieces, 15 Ninjas, illustrated with an AK-47 rifle. To most, it looked like a symbol of aggression, but to 2Pac, it was the blueprint for revolution. He came up with the idea during a time when he was thinking less like a rapper and more like a strategist. Growing up in a family full of activists, he learned early that change had to be organized, not chaotic. The idea behind the tattoo was simple but brilliant. If one strong Black man from each of America's 50 states came together, united by purpose, intelligence, and loyalty, they could form an unstoppable movement. To 2Pac, the word ninjas wasn't an insult. It stood for never ignorant, getting goals accomplished. It was about flipping the narrative, taking a word used to degrade and turning it into something strong, smart, and purposeful. He wanted that unity to be intellectual, about leadership and uplift, not chaos. He got the tattoo with his close circle, including his stepbrother, Mopreme Shakur, and friend Dana Smith. Mopreme later explained that 50 represented states. If we had one good ninja in every state, we could accomplish anything. Over time, the 50 Ninjas concept evolved into something bigger: Thug Life. What started as a call for unity grew into a philosophy, a movement that would speak for every person growing up in struggle. In songs and interviews, 2Pac often talked about spreading that message across the 50 states, the same vision that had first inspired the tattoo. Thug Life. Etched boldly across his stomach, with the letter I replaced by a bullet, Thug Life is the single most iconic tattoo of 2Pac Shakur's career and arguably the visual symbol that defines his entire philosophy. Done by tattoo artist Dennis Dago Coelho in Houston, Texas in December 1992, it wasn't just a statement for show. For 2Pac, it was the heart of his political and personal identity, the one that summed up everything he lived, fought, and ultimately died for. Most people saw thug life and thought it meant he was glorifying crime or violence, but the reality was much deeper. Tupac flipped the meaning of the word thug from an insult to a diagnosis of America's failures. He turned it into an acronym: Thug Life, the hate you gave little infants, F everybody. It was a statement about how the cycle of poverty, racism, and neglect in black communities doesn't just destroy those born into it, it poisons the entire system. When you raise generations of children surrounded by hate, broken homes, and desperation, that pain grows up and comes back to haunt society as a whole. That was his message. You can't keep feeding hate into young people and expect peace in return.
H-U-G-L-I-F-E. The hate you gave little infants, U-C-K, everybody. What you feed us as seeds grows and blows up in your face.
When thug life started spreading, Tupac realized the phrase had taken on a life of its own. People in crowds were chanting it back to him at shows, wearing it on shirts, repping it in the streets. He later said, "I realized I started something, and instead of letting it spiral out as just another slogan, he tried to channel that energy into something constructive. I wanted to organize those thugs," he said, because he saw power in numbers, if it could be guided the right way. So with his stepfather, Dr. Mutulu Shakur, a respected black liberation leader and former Black Panther, Tupac helped create what became known as the Code of Thug Life. It wasn't a gang manual or a set of street rules. It was an ethical code, meant to give structure, honor, and discipline to people in the streets who were trapped in the life. It laid out 26 principles, rules designed to reduce the chaos and protect their communities. The code banned things like carjacking in the hood and shooting at concerts or parties, calling those places neutral grounds. It demanded that civilians not be harmed and forbade selling drugs to kids or pregnant women, something Tupac described as baby killing and genocide. And at the heart of it all, it reminded everyone to know your target, who's the real enemy. The message was clear: don't destroy your own community while the real system of oppression sits untouched. That was the deeper meaning behind the tattoo. It wasn't about glorifying crime, it was about organizing pain into power. The bullet in place of the eye was there to remind everyone, including himself, that there was always a cost. To live the thug life was to live in a world where every move was a gamble. You either got rich, got locked up, or got killed. Tupac understood that fully, and he reflected it in his music. Lines like "I'm still living and packing my 9 till it's time to go to prison" capture the cold reality of that life. Celtic Cross. Covering nearly his entire back is one of Tupac's most profound and visually striking tattoos. A large Gothic-style cross with the words Exodus 18:31 etched boldly beneath it. It wasn't a random piece of art. It was a declaration of faith, rebellion, and history all wrapped into one. For Tupac, it was a symbol he wanted to carry with him for the rest of his life. On the surface, the cross looked like a nod to religion, a reminder of faith, sacrifice, and redemption. But the real power of this tattoo lies in the message hidden in that inscription. Exodus is the story of Moses leading his people out of slavery in the Bible, a tale of divine liberation. But 1831 isn't a biblical verse at all. It's a historical reference to one of the most significant moments in the history of black resistance, Nat Turner's rebellion. In August 1831, Nat Turner, an enslaved preacher in Virginia, led a violent uprising against slaveholders, killing nearly 60 white people in a rebellion that shook the South to its core. Though the revolt was brutally suppressed within days and Turner was captured and executed, his name became immortal, a symbol of courage, defiance, and the ultimate cost of freedom. To Tupac and his family, steeped in the radical teachings of the Black Panther Party and the New African Movement, Nat Turner wasn't just a figure from the past. He was an ancestor in the struggle, a man who embodied the same revolutionary fire they believed in. So when Tupac branded Exodus 18:31 across his back, he was connecting himself directly to that legacy. He was saying that the fight for liberation, whether through words or weapons, was still ongoing and that he was carrying it forward on his own skin. F the world. Just below his neck, stretched across his upper back, are 3 words that say everything about where Tupac's head and heart were in the mid-90s. F the world. It's one of the rawest, most emotional tattoos he ever got, a blunt, explosive declaration of pain, anger, and betrayal. By the time he had it inked, Tupac had been through hell. He'd been shot 5 times in the infamous Quad Studios attack in New York, betrayed by the people he once trusted, hit with an SA conviction he swore was unjust, and dragged through the media as a villain. It was 1994 going into 1995, the same period that birthed his deeply personal album, Me Against the World. That record was his therapy, full of reflections on paranoia, fear, and hopelessness. Songs like So Many Tears and Lord Knows were confessions of a man at war with both the world and himself. The tattoo on his back captured that same feeling in 3 words. It was the physical manifestation of the pain that fueled his music, the frustration of being misunderstood and vilified by a system that he was trying to challenge. The placement of the tattoo mattered too. By putting it across his back, Tupac was turning his back literally and symbolically on everyone who had turned theirs on him. The media, the courts, the industry, even friends who had betrayed him. This was his answer to them all. Smile now and cry later. Across the top of Tupac's back sits one of his most haunting and poetic tattoos, a pair of classic theater masks, one grinning and the other weeping. On the left, beneath a smiling mask, are the words, "Smile now." On the right, below the sorrowful one, "Cry later." These 2 faces, symbols that go all the way back to ancient Greek theater, represented comedy and tragedy, the eternal balance between joy and pain. But for Tupac, this tattoo wasn't just an artistic nod to theater, it was a raw philosophy about survival, emotion, and the masks people wear to make it through life. Tupac's version of Smile Now, Cry Later went beyond symbolism. It became a kind of emotional armor. In his world, especially coming from the streets and later navigating the cold machinery of fame, showing vulnerability could be dangerous. You couldn't let people see your weakness, not in the hood, not in the industry, not even sometimes in your own circle. Smiling now meant staying strong, keeping that unbreakable energy no matter what came your way. Crying later meant you saved the pain for private moments, away from the cameras, the crowd, and the chaos. It's a philosophy deeply tied to street culture, where the code often teaches you to keep your emotions locked away. For many young men growing up like Pac, the rule was simple: never let them see you hurt. And Pac lived that code, sometimes to his own detriment. He poured his truth into his music, but in public, he was the warrior, the survivor, the man who could take the world's blows and still laugh through the blood. He echoed that exact sentiment years later on the song Smile alongside Scarface when he said, "There's gonna be some stuff you're gonna see that's gonna make it hard to smile in the future, but whatever you see through all the rain and pain, you gotta keep a sense of humor. Gotta be able to smile through all this BS." The timing of the tattoo adds another layer of meaning. Around this period, Tupac was recording Me Against the World, an album soaked in paranoia, heartbreak, and defiance. He was fresh off surviving a shooting in New York, sitting in courtrooms, and watching so-called friends turn their backs. The weight of betrayal and the system's relentless pressure nearly broke him. Ballin. Stamped boldly across Tupac's lower back is the word Ballin, a declaration of ambition and achievement that reflects one of his defining traits, the relentless pursuit of success. In the street dictionary, Ballin means living big, shining despite the odds and turning struggle into luxury. But for Tupac, it was about independence, self-respect, and the hustle it took to get there. The tattoo ties directly to a song Straight Ballin' from Thug Life Volume 1, where he famously said, "I would share the definition of ballin' with you white folks, but now the game is to be sold, not told, so F y'all." He believed the system had always exploited the black struggle for its own profit, and Ballin was his way of flipping that narrative. If the world had made him play a dirty game, he was determined to play it better and on his own terms. For Tupac, being Ballin meant more than flashing jewelry or fame. It meant control. Control over your destiny, your art, your message. He wanted to show that someone from the projects, someone born into chaos, could rise to the level of power and wealth that society tried to deny him. And even when he flaunted that success, there was always deeper meaning behind it. His wealth wasn't just a flex, it was a weapon against poverty, a symbol of freedom. The placement of the tattoo, low on his back, almost like a banner across his foundation, made it a constant reminder of the grind that built him. Every dollar, every verse, every sleepless night chasing his dreams, all of it fed into that word, Ballin. Panther Head. High on his arm, right where a soldier might wear an emblem, Tupac had a fierce panther head tattooed, teeth bared, eyes sharp, ready for battle. The panther wasn't random, it was a direct homage to the Black Panther Party, the revolutionary organization that shaped his entire identity. Both of Tupac's parents, Afeni Shakur and Billy Garland, were active Panthers. His mother, Afeni, was even one of the Panther 21, a group charged in a high-profile case that accused them of plotting bombings in New York. She represented herself in court and beat the case. That kind of fire, that kind of unbreakable defiance was in 2Pac's DNA. The tattoo symbolized strength, resistance, and the fight for Black liberation. The Black Panther Party's 10-point program called for freedom, decent housing, an end to police brutality, and education that told the truth about Black history. Those demands weren't just political statements, they were personal for 2Pac. Everything he wrote, rapped, or stood for carried the same message: self-determination and justice for his people. Growing up surrounded by revolutionaries gave him a sense of purpose far beyond fame. He understood that every song, every interview, every move he made could be used as a weapon in that same struggle his parents fought in. The Panther Head ink was his way of carrying that movement on his skin. The placement of the tattoo sitting right at the top of his arm makes it look like a crest of honor. It's almost like he was wearing the legacy of his parents and the Panthers as a badge, reminding himself daily of where he came from and what he stood for. Jesus on a burning cross. On 2Pac's left arm rests one of his most striking and deeply personal tattoos, a depiction of Jesus wearing a crown of thorns hanging on a burning cross with the bold words, "Only God can judge me," inked beside it. The image is raw, emotional, and unapologetically spiritual, and it captures the turbulence of his mid-1990s life like few other symbols could. By this point, 2Pac felt like he was being crucified in real time, by the media, by the justice system, and even by the people he once trusted. The burning cross wasn't just a religious symbol, it was a statement. It represented the destruction of everything fake, corrupt, and oppressive, the burning away of hypocrisy, leaving only pure faith behind. The cross on fire was 2Pac's way of saying that the system itself had lost its soul, and only something divine, something untouched by man's judgment, could truly see him for who he was. The phrase, "Only God can judge me," became a mantra that defined his entire identity during this chapter of his life. It was a rejection of all the noise around him. Every headline, every courtroom, every critic trying to define his morality, Pac was done listening. To him, judgment from anyone other than his creator didn't matter. That mindset hardened after November 1994, when he was ambushed and shot 5 times at Quad Studios in New York. Even as he sat in a wheelchair heavily bandaged, he was still forced to appear in court the very next day. The image of a wounded 2Pac rolling into a courtroom instead of a hospital bed summed up everything. A man fighting battles on every side, still expected to stand tall. Spiritually, the tattoo connects directly to what he poured into me against the world. The phrase, "Only God can judge me," captured the defiance that fueled that project. He knew he wasn't perfect, and he didn't care to pretend. What mattered to him was that he lived honestly, even if that honesty made people uncomfortable. There was also a deeper fear behind the ink. 2Pac often talked about his only fear of death, not dying itself, but being reincarnated into the same cycle of struggle, pain, and injustice. He feared being trapped in that endless loop of suffering, never breaking free. Outlaw. On that same arm just below his spiritual declaration, 2Pac carried another defining word: outlaw. The word stood for operating under thug laws as warriors, and it marked a new era in his life. After his release from prison in 1995, Pac wasn't the same man. The betrayal he experienced from people he once trusted, from a system that seemed hell-bent on destroying him, pushed him into a different headspace. He no longer wanted to move alone. He wanted an army. That's when he formed his crew, the Outlaws, a collective of loyal, militant young rappers who shared his vision of brotherhood, strategy, and defiance.
When I was born, because that's how long I've been knowing him, and that answers that question. I met Pac about 4 or 5 years ago from Gaddafi, from Jersey. I met him in Jersey, you know.
To the outside world, outlaw meant criminal, someone outside the law. But to 2Pac, it meant liberation, someone who refused to live by the system's rules because those rules were never written for people like him in the first place. The acronym operating under thug laws as warriors said it all. He was done playing the victim. From that point on, he was going to live and die by his own code. The Outlaws became more of a group. They were his family, his soldiers, his disciples of the thug life movement. They embodied the same energy as his earlier code, the one that demanded honor and discipline in the streets. Pac wanted to turn pain into power, chaos into organization, and in his eyes, these young men were his chance to do that. Be ambitious with love while young. On 2Pac's upper right arm lies one of his most introspective and quietly powerful tattoos. It features an image of a scale, one side holding a baby, the other weighed down by gold bars, topped with the words, "Be ambitious with love while young." This tattoo feels like a personal note, a reminder, almost like something he wished someone had told him earlier. The scale symbolizes the constant tug-of-war that defined his life, the balance between money and morality, success and compassion, ambition and love. The baby on the scale represents innocence, family, and the people you love. The gold bars symbolize wealth, hustle, and the drive to make it out of poverty. For Tupac, both sides mattered, but he knew how easy it was for one to outweigh the other. The streets demanded hunger, but too much hunger could turn a man cold. This tattoo was his way of reminding himself and everyone watching him that love should never be lost in the grind. The phrase "be ambitious with love while young" captures that entire philosophy. Tupac was always preaching about ambition, about working hard, chasing dreams, staying driven, but he also knew how ambition could consume you. He'd seen too many people sacrifice their humanity chasing power. To him, the phrase was advice to the next generation: go hard, but don't forget your heart. It also ties to his code of thug life, the street manifesto he co-wrote with his stepfather, Mutulu Shakur. That code demanded respect, especially for children and families. It outlawed selling drugs to kids, shooting at parties, and harming the innocent. In that same spirit, this tattoo became a moral compass, reminding him and others that being a boss or a hustler meant protecting your people, not exploiting them. Skull and Crossbones. This haunting tattoo on Tupac's right arm was pain made permanent. The design features a skull and crossbones, the word heartless, and the chilling phrase, "My only fear of death is coming back reincarnated." Together, they tell the story of a man who had been betrayed, broken, and reborn into something harder, colder, and more dangerous than before. The skull and crossbones, a universal symbol of death and danger, marked a turning point in his life. It represented the death of his old self, the passionate, trusting Tupac who still believed loyalty was sacred. After the Quad Studio shooting in 1994, that version of him was gone. The world had shown its fangs and he adapted. The word "heartless" inked above the skull reflected the armor he built to survive. It wasn't that he wanted to be without feeling, it was that emotion had almost gotten him killed. Every betrayal, every bullet wound hardened him a little more. From that point on, he stopped moving with emotion and started moving with calculation. The roots of that paranoia ran deep, and it all circled back to Randy "Stretch" Walker. Stretch wasn't just a friend, he was like family. The two had shared countless studio sessions, performances, and hustles. But when Tupac was ambushed and shot 5 times at Quad Studios in New York, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone close had set him up. And in his mind, Stretch fit the profile. Stretch had been the middleman between Tupac and Jimmy Henchman, the very man accused of luring him into that deadly trap. To Tupac, that was more than coincidence. On the track "Holla at Me," he didn't hold back, spitting the line directly, "You infiltrated my team and sold a ninja's dreams. How could you do me like that?"
And the reason I knew my homeboys set me up is because my homeboys knew I was strapped. The dudes came straight for me. My homeboys is behind it. Like they running for the swag. My homeboys behind it, and they didn't do nothing. It was grab the and I could have bust. But they got guns to these and coming for me, and these niggas just sitting there. And they said get, and these niggas dropped to the floor. I knew it was a setup.
The fallout between the two men was immediate and tragic. Stretch denied any involvement, even saying publicly that he was hurt by the accusation and that he'd never set his brother up. But fate played a cruel hand. Exactly 1 year after the Quad shooting on November 30th, 1995, Stretch was gunned down in Queens. Same day, same hour. It was an eerie symmetry that only deepened Tupac's belief that the streets always balance their debts. Then there was that final phrase, "My only fear of death is coming back reincarnated." Those words capture the spiritual side of Tupac's struggle. Unlike most, he didn't fear dying. He feared the idea of living again, the idea of being reborn into the same pain, the same injustice, the same chaos he'd been trying to escape. In a way, it was his version of rejecting samsara, the endless cycle of rebirth and suffering. Tupac's faith was a mix of Christianity, street philosophy, and spiritual rebellion. He believed God was real, but the world was hell, and being forced to relive it would be the ultimate punishment. Notorious. On Tupac's right forearm sat another powerful tattoo, Notorious. The ink stood as a memorial for his fallen friend Big Kato, real name Kevin Perkins. Kato had been an early supporter of Tupac's thug life movement and a close friend of Big Syke. Together, they had big dreams of using music to pull people out of the streets, not bury them deeper in it. But those dreams ended in tragedy when Kato was murdered in April 1993, reportedly over a pair of Dayton rims. That senseless killing cut deep. Kato's death wasn't just another street casualty to 2Pac. It represented everything wrong with the cycle of violence they were trying to stop. 2Pac paid tribute to Kato the way he knew best, through his music and his skin. The Notorious tattoo was both a badge of remembrance and defiance. By labeling himself Notorious, 2Pac was flipping the script. If the world saw him as a menace, then fine, he'd wear that title and make it stand for something deeper. He wasn't just notorious for being wild or violent, he was notorious for feeling too deeply, for loving too hard, for fighting a system that was built to destroy people like him and Kato. He immortalized his fallen friend in How Long Will They Mourn Me, rapping, "This is for my ninja Kato and all his kids." Each bar dripped with mourning, guilt, and the frustration of seeing yet another life snuffed out before it could bloom. The Notorious tattoo ensured that Kato's name and everything he represented lived on through 2Pac's body. MOB. Etched on the back of 2Pac's right arm were 3 bold letters that summed up his attitude during his death row years. MOB. It stood for Money Over B, and it perfectly captured his headspace during one of the most volatile, power-driven chapters of his life. When he got out of prison in 1995 and signed to death row, 2Pac was done with trust, done with emotion, and done with illusions. Survival now meant staying laser-focused on getting money, building power, and staying loyal only to the paper and the mission. On his posthumous track MOB, he rapped, "I'm 'bout my riches, money over B, rather be lonely honey and dodge you like snitches." The tattoo symbolized that ruthless, business-minded version of 2Pac, the one who'd been betrayed, locked up, and was now determined never to be vulnerable again. It was about discipline, control, and empire building. Under Suge Knight's death row records, 2Pac became both a weapon and a businessman. Every move was calculated, every relationship had purpose, and every dollar was strategy. But there was another layer to MOB. The placement on the back of his arm sent a message to anyone walking behind him. It was almost like a warning. His loyalty wasn't to people anymore, it was to the grind. You couldn't stab him in the back if he didn't turn around to trust you. Still beneath that hardened exterior, 2Pac remained conflicted. While he shouted Money Over B in the booth, he was still the same man who once tattooed "Be ambitious with love while young" on his arm. Trust nobody. On the inside of 2Pac's right forearm, boldly inked into his skin, were 2 words that summed up his new way of life after 1994. Trust nobody. Around it was a small 7-point crown, symbolizing a kind of spiritual immortality, the idea that while his body could be broken, his soul, his legacy, and his lessons would live on forever. He got this tattoo in October 1995, right after coming out of prison, at Andy Neville's tattoo asylum in Venice Beach. By that time, he wasn't just a rapper anymore. He was a man transformed by betrayal, bullets, and the brutal weight of fame. The phrase "trust nobody" was his final declaration of independence from everyone who had hurt him, lied to him, or used him. It was more than a slogan, it was a survival rule. The roots of that phrase go back to one of the darkest chapters in his life, the Quad Studio shooting in November 1994. 2Pac was ambushed, shot 5 times, and robbed while heading to record a feature in New York. He survived, but the damage went deeper than flesh. The attack convinced him that people close to him might have set him up. That was the moment something inside him snapped. His old trust in friendship, loyalty, and even love disintegrated. When he got locked up in Clinton Correctional Facility, he spent hours reading Niccolo Machiavelli's The Prince. Machiavelli. On the right side of 2Pac's neck, in bold script, was the word MAKAVELI. For him, this wasn't just a name, it was a rebirth. MAKAVELI was the final evolution of 2Pac Shakur, the transformation from victim to strategist, from emotional artist to cold, calculating visionary. It was the mask he wore to survive the chaos that surrounded him. The name came from Italian philosopher Niccolo Machiavelli, whose writings 2Pac devoured while in prison. Machiavelli taught that a ruler must be cunning, ruthless, and willing to deceive in order to hold power. He also wrote that sometimes, to gain an advantage, a prince should fake his own death, vanish, and return stronger. 2Pac took that to heart. To him, Machiavelli wasn't just a theorist, he was a blueprint for survival in a world that had tried to kill him. He took that name and made it his own, flipping the spelling into Makaveli. Under that identity, Tupac planned to strike back at the people and systems that had wronged him. His fifth album, The Don Killuminati, The 7-Day Theory, released under that name, was his grand statement. The album cover said it all. Tupac crucified like Jesus wearing a crown of thorns. It was his way of saying, you try to kill me, you try to crucify me, but I'm still here. I've risen. It was also a warning to everyone who thought he was finished. He was coming back sharper, colder, and more dangerous. The title Killuminati itself hinted at something deeper, the desire to kill the Illuminati or expose the secret powers that manipulated the industry and the world. Whether it meant literally or symbolically, Tupac used the concept to declare war on corruption, lies, and control. The Makaveli persona also shifted his music's tone. The introspection of me against the world gave way to the fury of hit 'em up. His delivery became more aggressive, his message more militant. He began to think and move like a general, plotting moves, forming alliances, and treating his music like battle tactics. Makaveli the Don became his alter ego, the version of himself that was unafraid to burn everything down, to rebuild his empire. Boss PLAYAZ. Across the back of his neck, just beneath his hairline and close to the Makaveli tattoo, Tupac carried another piece of his philosophy, Boss PLAYAZ. Sometimes it was accompanied by a small crown symbolizing mastery, control, and self-made authority. It was the crown jewel of his ink collection, literally and metaphorically, because this one represented the final level in Tupac's personal code of manhood. By the time he got this tattoo, Tupac had mapped out his own hierarchy of life, something he often discussed in prison letters and interviews. He believed every man started as a dust kicker, someone struggling to find his place in the world. If he survived the streets, learned the code, and earned respect, he could evolve into a thug ninja. But the top of the ladder, the ultimate goal, was to become a boss playa. That title didn't just mean money or fame, it meant control, wisdom, and responsibility. To Tupac, a boss playa wasn't just a hustler who made it big. He was a leader, a builder, and a protector. In one of his writings, he described it perfectly. A boss playa is a thinker, a leader, a builder, a soldier, a teacher, and most of all, a man. That line summed up the essence of what he wanted to be. He wasn't chasing riches for greed's sake. He saw money as a tool to uplift his people and make the community safer. That philosophy tied directly back to his code of thug life. The code was about responsibility, no harming children, no destroying your own community, and understanding who the real enemy was. Boss PLAYAZ was the final expression of that same code. It meant that once you made it out of the dirt, your job was to use your position to protect those still in it. The placement of the tattoo on the back of his neck made sense too. It was like a self-crowning moment, a declaration that he'd reached a new level of maturity, power, and focus. Anyone standing behind him could see it, and that was intentional. DADA. This one sat quietly on the inner side of his left forearm, the word DADA inked above a small crown. It was simple, almost understated compared to the bold slogans and militant imagery scattered across the rest of his body, but in many ways this tattoo revealed more about him than any of the others. It wasn't about revolution, survival, or strategy, it was about love. DADA was Tupac's permanent tribute to Kidada Jones, the woman he planned to marry. Kidada wasn't just any girlfriend, she was the daughter of music legend Quincy Jones and someone Tupac would later call his anchor during his final chaotic months. Kidada herself once said Tupac was the love of my life, and by all accounts, the feeling was mutual. Their relationship began in late 1995 or early 1996, but the way it started was almost cinematic. A few years before, Tupac had gone on record criticizing Quincy Jones for dating white women, a remark that sparked a public backlash. Quincy's daughter, Rashida Jones, even wrote an open letter to the Source magazine calling Tupac out for his comments. At that point, any chance of a friendship between Pac and the Jones family seemed impossible. But fate had other plans. One night, Tupac and Kidada ran into each other at a club. Instead of the fiery personality people were used to seeing, Pac approached her humbly. He apologized for what he'd said about her father, admitting, "I didn't see you as real human beings. I was wrong. I didn't mean that about your dad or you." That raw honesty broke the ice, and just like that, something clicked between them. From that night forward, their relationship moved fast and deep.
I was at a club one night in New York, and he thought I was Rashida. 2Pac did, and he came up to me, and he was apologizing about the article that he wrote about my parents. And inside I'm just like, oh my God, he is so cute.
Unlike many of his previous flings, DADA represented a completely different side of life, one grounded in creativity, design, and elegance. She was a stylist for Vibe magazine and later worked for Tommy Hilfiger, deeply involved in the fashion world. Through her, 2Pac began to experience a different rhythm, far removed from the paranoia and constant danger that surrounded Death Row Records. The DADA tattoo, resting across from the Trust Nobody ink on his other arm, almost felt like a contradiction. One arm screaming survival, the other whispering love and vulnerability. By mid-1996, their bond had gone public in a big way. In July of that year, 2Pac and DADA walked hand in hand down the runway at the Versace fashion show in Milan, turning heads across the world. It was a striking image, the once outlawed rapper now dressed in luxury Italian fashion alongside the daughter of one of America's most respected musicians. To many, it looked like 2Pac was finally turning a corner, like he'd found something worth living for beyond fame, violence, and revenge. But that moment of peace didn't last long. Just 2 months later, on the night of September 7, 1996, DADA was waiting for 2Pac in their Las Vegas hotel suite when the call came. 2Pac had been shot. She rushed to the hospital, where she stayed by his side until he passed away 6 days later. For DADA, the tattoo on his arm was now all that remained, a quiet, permanent reminder of their love.